Hello, welcome to the April 2022 meeting of the Knowledge Management Community of DC. And today we're very lucky we have Cynthia Hilsinger presenting Creating the Knowledge Management Model for the 21st Century. Cynthia is a speaker, practitioner, instructor, and champion for knowledge management in the federal government. We are so pleased that she is willing to share this with us and so we can make history, the knowledge management model for the 21st century. Cynthia, please take it away.
And then you bring up the first slide.
And okay, Cynthia, over to you.
So if you bring up slide 1, please.
Hang on. Can everybody see slide 1?
It's coming in. It takes a hesitation there. And I've got to change my view. So I can bring up my slide. All right. So knowledge management. Everyone says that they know what the individual words mean. You know, they understand knowledge, they understand management, but even joining those words did not create a universal understanding of the concept of knowledge management. People had to use models and graphs and diagrams to show you what they meant by KM. So our understanding of KM is better when we see a model or an abstract concept. The common data, information, knowledge, and wisdom pyramid that you see, back to the first one with the pyramid, Tara, that one there. So this common data, information, knowledge, and wisdom pyramid used in conjunction with knowledge management appeared in a 1974 journal and is attributed to educator Nicholas Henry. He was the first to try to describe how data, information, and knowledge was built together. He created this pyramid so we could have a concept of how all of this worked together. And this began our first effort in creating these models to understand this abstract concept. Again, go to slide 2.
Okay, slide 2.
Slide 2, the one with Nonaka and Taguchi.
Yes, sorry.
So interest in how information changes and becomes knowledge pushed another team to build the Nonaka and Taguchi the Secchi cycle because it describes socialization, externalization, combination, and internalization. So SECI. And this model was developed in 1990 by Ikujiro Naka, a friend, Hirotaka Taguchi. Third slide, please. Next slide. Then the Army became interested in knowledge management, and their concern, back one slide, please.
Sorry.
That one. So the Army became interested in knowledge management. Their concern was organizational performance. What is the path that knowledge takes in order to get it to a decision maker so a unit can perform its orders? And this model depicts how processes and expectations are externalized and written down so new soldiers can access them and combine them with other information sources. And there is still a need for fidelity in how knowledge should circulate and what part we humans play in the data and information battle. But it tried to get after, how this flow started to work and how knowledge was moving. And understand, for the Army, uh, people are always turning over every 2 or 3 years. So making sure that the new person knew what to do was a very important element, and they tried to model this on this particular model. Next slide, Tara. So then Morgan McGarry refined the KM pyramid by naming where digital decisioning breaks with human knowledge adjustments. And we are still dealing with the problem of what part is information management and what part is knowledge management, and who does what, and what does knowledge generate. So you can see these different bands, and you can see where you look at the notes: organizational culture, cross-functional teams, down to just sources and connections of assets and formats down at the data. And you can see how context and decision making is driven upward, and then understanding comes down. You're always looking at data moving in time. It isn't just an individual, but it moves in time from when you get the data, how it's structured, the knowledge it makes, and then the decision you have to make from it. Next slide, Tara. So further development and the concern of how did knowledge move in the DoD, because the Army and several were big components of KM. And so the 2019 Knowledge Management Summit at DISA wrestled with knowledge management and where it sat at the table. Did it sit at the IT table? Did it belong in the IT department or the G6 or the J6? And how was it different than SharePoint and information management? And KMers came together to refine the Department of Defense, um, the DODI 8220, which was a DOD instruction on knowledge management. And we had the original pyramid, and the first report out at that KM summit. Several of the SESs and general officers and flag officers felt the static, typical knowledge pyramid that we saw earlier in this series of slides. The first report out said that data, information, knowledge, wisdom pyramid did not represent the KM movement and its outcomes. So John Fay and I developed this model by the end of that 2019 summit. And I had it stitched on a ball cap and tried to socialize this. Um, and so this is where understanding replaced wisdom. So it is data, information, knowledge, and understanding, because for the DoD and several other components, it was a shared understanding or a common understanding of what the data and information was telling us. So we had a common understanding of what the data or orders meant and how we were to act and react to that. So we tried to make it in a circle. We would have knowledge management as the conductor in the center, and all of those components wrapped together would give us these outcomes. Next slide, Tara. So again, for the military and the DoD, this got to be important because there was data management, information management, knowledge management. And so knowledge always prepares you to act. And that was the thing, the DoD. What can we do? Until we can act, we don't have knowledge. We're just assembling pieces of information so we can act. So if you're unable to act, you should look for additional information so you're ready. And then Fred Hopewell, who works for the Marine Corps, combined the data, information, knowledge, understanding with the Observe, Orient, Decide Act, or the OODA loop, which the OODA loop results in an action, which is observed, orient, decide, and act. And so it is still linear. You can definitely see these columns and things move left to right. They're a little bit of a stovepipe. KM sits in its pillar, IM sits in its pillar, and data sits in its
I
pillar.
tell you,
It
yeah,
was
they work
still
now.
kind of stovepiped, and it didn't quite depict
Oh, good, good.
a
Madam
fusion.
Serious. You get to.
Someone needs to
We
go
got a
on
live
mute.
mic.
I'm hearing a lot of either feedback or conversation.
It came up. I think it was yesterday. That's what I was saying. And I said, oh, I haven't spoken
Somebody-
to.
Someone
Guy,
has
we
a
have
hot
live
mic.
Yeah, I was talking to Yolanda. And
Guy, you have a hot mic and you're over talking the presenter.
I'm sorry.
Please put your mic on mute, because we don't want to listen to your conversation, as interesting as it was getting.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
So, so understanding that, again, this OODA loop and these elements of data, information, knowledge still look very stovepiped, and it didn't depict a fusion of elements that together transform data into information and knowledge. And so we were here. Corey Cannon is working on his PhD. And if you get to the next slide, Tara, slide 7. We started looking at how does that move. And so the DoD community began a doctrinal change request for knowledge management in order to have a unified KM doctrine, because we have KM in many of the defense agencies and combatant commands and armed services. And we were trying to unify those. And so again, the conversations over who has responsibility over what part of the information conversion to knowledge supports decisions. Wisdom, again, is reintroduced. And just because you can do something doesn't always mean it's wise to do it. And so we begin to see the stirring of a new age of, if you look at today and how the KM career is reacting to current events, if you look at misinformation, deep fakes, data manipulation, the influence warfare, and the context of information of knowledge warfare, there is a concern. Can we trust the information the computer outputs? So wisdom, once again, is reintroduced. Today there still are people who they have a strong belief that COVID-19 never happened. It's just a political contrivance, and it is all fake, and that is their belief. They've taken information and they've put it aside, whether it's from the CDC or and so again, there is a choice. How do we vet that information? How do we know it's trusted information? We have to look at, is it scientific information? So we have to look at, the wisdom of, where did you get that data? And is it critical data? Is it authoritative data? It isn't just what popped up on Twitter and what can be found and worked on the internet. So, we start looking at wisdom again. So data, information, decision and wisdom. We do have the sense of it's synthesized, it's contextual, um, and those items and cycles need to go through it. Who does what to what grouping here? Again, things get broken into sections, and again, kind of a linear flow. So we needed to look at how fluid information and knowledge is. And now knowledge isn't something that's easily looked up. It can be worked. So next slide, Tara, slide 8, please. So here we start looking at, insight and intelligence. Is that the smartest thing? In today's news cycle, you see people who believe, oh, you just need to take horse dewormer, ivermectin, and that will make sure you are inoculated against COVID. It isn't my preference, but it's their belief. And so we start looking at what's the wisdom, what's the insight, what's the knowledge? Is that a smart thing to do with the information that's given? Now we're looking at, okay, we've got this information, but maybe I need to use my noggin to look at that kind of stuff. And so these items were pillared, put in these silos. Some feedback came off of that, and a lot of folks said, well, again, very siloed, and very linear. And so back and forth. So dissertation candidate Corey Cannon, he's working on his PhD in KM at the University of Hong Kong. He's stationed out in Korea. And we're trying to get away from that linear, static kind of model for knowledge, because I want to see that that play and that vetting and that sense of checking and looking and that working and that development. And so I went from this, I looked at this model and I said, today's knowledge management, it's much more fluid. It moves, it reacts to its environment, it reacts to belief in information and intelligence. And so then, Tara, go to the next slides, please. And I came up with this model. So I took Corey's concept and created this model. And this group had a peek at it at the last meeting. It went back to the University of Hong Kong and Mr. Cannon, and he shared it with his PhD advisor. The doctoral committee wanted a few more refinements. And I took some of the comments from this group from the last meeting, saying, there ought to be some arrow conversions, when does data become a fact and fact becomes information, and how that moves. We need a little more play in that. And so time goes by, and conversations arose about the criticality of technology, the human impact in the conversion of the information, who had primacy, is data and information more important than the human side of it, and getting away from that linear either pyramid going up or pillars to the right, who's in charge, and the fighting for primacy on that. And those were very good conversations to have. And so from this model and part of that interplay and that conversation back and forth, I refined that model and came up with this one. Tara, next slide, please. No, one back. So we developed this version. Next one. There, stop there. We developed this version that models technology-assisted governance and human governance of the conversion of information to knowledge. And I remind you, prior to computers and prior to electricity, this loop was done only under human governance and is still done under human governance. But let me just say, we're not oblivious to or ignorant to the religion of technologists whose belief that computers are the answer to every problem. Mind you, when we start moving into AI, I say, it's not time to turn off the brain. We still need a human. So we realize a good KM model must stand in a world where both technology and people exist and work with this. And so models kind of help us understand the theoretical concepts, and good models are memorable and depict the current situation we're in. And as we move out of the information age and develop not models for the knowledge age, they will reflect the struggles of the human environment as it works within this technology. Mind you, technology will change, and we KMers will shape and define that change and its influence in the human environment. So I wanted to make sure that we had human governed and examples of how humans can take information and throw it out of the decision cycle until that information has been vetted and we find that information to be relevant to humans. And most of you have experienced that. If you've watched TV a long time ago, here's an example of information, data and information vetting. Think of think of adult telling children, this is healthy, it's good for you. And of course the kids are going, I don't know. The parents give this information, good for you. The kids want to know, does it taste good? Well, they use a vetting cycle. They slide the bowl of cereal down to Mikey, the little kid, and they watch. Is he eating it? Yep, yep, yep. And they all go, Mikey likes it. Well, then the older kids, that's vetted information now, because that child, if Mikey likes it, cereal must be good. And so we're now in an environment, not that information uh, is it. We're looking for vetted information, trusted information, and many of you, you know, will ask questions. Hey, I found this on the internet, or I found this here, or I saw this. Is this right, or is this a phishing attack? Is this true info? Is this real data or authoritative? Can we change that information into knowledge? So so humans know how to consume that, and that's what this infinity loop is. That I feel there always should be a governance between what is moved up to the humans, and then the humans decide, is that a right action? Um, I've had an experience in my life where in a Y2K a Y2K patch, maybe some of you were too young for this, but 1999 to 2000, there was going to be a concern. Dates were written in two numbers for the day, two numbers for the month, and two numbers for the year. Well, at the end of 1999, it was going to roll over into two zeros. Oh my goodness. That meant 1900, not 2000. And everybody was worried about doing Y2K patches. And at a Y2K patch, the computer burped out the fact that I had died. I wasn't there anymore. I died. My paycheck stopped. My federal employee group life insurance was looking for the beneficiary. Didn't get paid. A lot of things happen when you die. And so not everything that comes out of a computer is correct and is accurate. And that's where we humans have to use some discernment. Is that right? Is that correct? And it took a human being to override computer systems to make me alive again. And so again, we're starting to look at this infinity loop. No one side is linear. No one side is hierarchical. It's a movement between what the data, information, data, authentication, and information. Then we take our intelligence, turn it into knowledge. Is it correct? Insight. Now I understand. I can act on it. That feeds back in, and we start moving into that, infinity flow there. And so this is the model that was presented at the KM symposium here, and looking at how we are moving out of these siloed, stepped elements into a consistent flow. AI will be looking at that as it starts talking to different databases and moving data and information across different flows and checking and vetting it, and then a human, um, you know, authorizing it, uh, and giving it understanding and action, meaning, okay, gatekeeper will allow that. Um, so it's a good change instead of a very hierarchical siloed element. And so this is the model that, if you have a question, I'm going to say, put it in the chat and then raise your hand and we'll ask the questions. Ask your questions and I can answer them if you have a way of improving the model. Right now, Corey Ken is saying this model is kind of, not done, but he wants to copyright what comes out of the final vetting of this. And so kind of a historical event where we're looking at, another, once it gets published, just like Nonaka and Taguchi, people came together, developed that model, and it's published and then copyrighted. And so here's a chance to take a look at what else should we put at, I'm thinking maybe culture on one side, etc., because culture informs us what knowledge means. And so that's where we are, or that's the model that we have for this group that I'm presenting as a new model instead of, the data, information, knowledge, wisdom pyramid. Next slide, please. So on the left, I have a sample of data, how it's being worked, sorted, and arranged, turns to information with context. And then this is the human interpreted story of what all these pieces mean. And so this is where I'm wanting your collaborations and questions on, is this a good model going forward for the knowledge instead of the information era? I feel we've left the information age and we've moved to the knowledge age. And so collaborations and questions on tonight's presentation for a new model for the 21st century. So where do we throw in bias and misunderstanding? 51 former intelligence sources said the Hunter Biden laptop with his naked 14-year-old niece was a Russian misinformation campaign. How do we square um, how supposedly rational people can look at the same information and come up with completely different analysis? That is a cultural aspect. And you have to then look at your model and say, where do we authenticate? Where do we, and if you make that larger, Tara, if you go to slide, I think it's 9 or 10, that slide that you're on. Yeah,
Yeah.
go to 10 and make 10 large. Just bring this line down,
Mm.
this line right above the URL. Um, drag it down and that'll make that larger.
Sorry, guys.
It's okay. That is where you have to have a conversation on intelligence, which you see that in Fox News a lot. You know, people make a, a position statement out of that. You also have to take into account what their knowledge level and their insight is. Do they have insight about that? Your insight is informed by culture, by what that means. And so you're going to be looking at those. Maybe, are you saying maybe we should change the word insight into culture? But many of us felt that our insight is informed by culture, and we don't want to say that culture is equal to knowledge, but culture gives insight into the information, and with our knowledge, with our intelligence, that also informs our bias as well. Um, um, Even you said people were taking horse dewormer, not a Nobel Prize winning medication used millions of times. That is a fundamental misunderstanding of the medication and the reason for its administration. The doctors, theoretically highly educated, came up with different prescriptions. My insight was informed by 10 years with an intelligence analyst who kept track of what the Russians do. I understand. We looked at the word belief, and my instance is belief overrides information and knowledge. I can say to you, prove to me that there's a God, or there isn't a God, whatever. You may not be able to prove that. So if you ask me that question, Cynthia, can you prove that there is a God? I might say, no, I can't prove it, but I'm still a believer. So, when people have a belief, they will discard information, like the people who believe that COVID-19 was a political ploy, even though the CDC and National Institutes of Health, they could show you exactly what the virus looked like from electron scans. That is all information. But if my belief is it's all made up, my belief will trump and replace whatever the information is. And then you have to look at what the intelligence, knowledge, and insight of that person is, and how that is informed by a person's the culture, and that human governance side of things, that discernment. Am I being informed by my culture? Am I being informed by my bias? Am I being informed by who do I consider a credible source? If I think my Aunt Matilda is a credible source, I will listen to her over what is on the news, or what is in the textbook, or what is handed out at CVS pharmacy for my vaccinations. And so that's where we have to look at human behavior, that goes into that, and to a certain degree, how easily I could be duped by uh, some other factors that might be bad data, or it could be consistent misinformation or disinformation, or manipulation of information, which many have said Russia and Putin has done for against our society, putting a lot of misinformation on uh, Facebook sites and other things. Um, so Vanessa says, or does a reference to insight equals the aha moment? Perhaps information or limited information leads to a working hypothesis that needs to be considered. True, and many people, they may be in a position where they haven't decided yet, and that's where they may go to uh, who I feel is, a knowledgeable person, somebody, a smart person, somebody that uh, I feel has credible experience, could be a credible source. And then I'll go to them and say, hey, what about this? What do you think? I'm undecided about it. And they can sway me one way or another. They may support their hypothesis. This is what I believe. What about you? And they may sway me. But again, there's going to be that uh, they give me their arguments, and they provide the facts and the information for what they believe or what they think is correct, and then I use my intelligence and I decide, is it right? Do I accept that? I think they're right, in insight, and then I go, okay, well, I will take it for now, and then I'll act on it, and you kind of see a little bit of that loop and that vetting back and forth. Um, Ivan Tieper says confirmation bias is a real problem. It is a tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that confirms or supports one's prior beliefs or values. That is much true, even though data and facts can point to something. If they have a confirmation bias, they may throw that information away. Here's my story. I was working for the Air Force at the Pentagon. I went to uh, the Human Resources Department, and I said, "Hey, I can vouch for me. See me? Uh, I didn't die. I never died because I asked why my retirement had a break of service." And their answer was, and they turned the computer screen around and they said, "You had a break in service for the period that you were dead." And I went, "But I never died." They just kept reading it off the screen. That's what the information says. You had a break in service for the period that you were dead. And I'm just going, I don't know how to break through with that. It just, I, it, and finally somebody says, Cynthia, you need a special act of Congress because there's no decision matrix for that. They don't know how to interpret that. There's the information, and you provided that you never died, and it's not breaking through to the GS, small time person. They can't see that. So, Scott, do you think we should put somewhere your comment in the intelligence community? Intelligence is vetted and verified information. After that comes analysis. So, information, intelligence, analysis. Would you put analysis where insight is, or would you add it before wisdom? Or maybe between information, instead of intelligence, we put in information analysis, and take out intelligence. Or wisdom is a proficiency level to that insight. Well, okay. Um, so Dennis says, I liked your earlier instance of trust, authority, evidence in the model. All right. Maybe we can put trust, change one of the words out for trust. Um, or Tara, go to the next slide where the human governance, uh, which is slide 10, and see where the systems governance and the humans governance, and you'll see different aspects there. So on the human governed side, we'll see discernment, morals, and ethics when we look at is the information right? We look at, was the information vetted? I know it was. Or, were the systems trusted? Are the systems set up? Has the data, uh, it hasn't been hacked, it hasn't been changed. And so there we have some systems governed and human governed on each side of that model. And so that can possibly answer some of those other aspects to how data, information, human thinking, decision making, understanding, insight, all of that works together. And so that's why I added that human governed and systems governed side. If we feel our systems have been hacked, we might just unplug the computer and say, no, we got to cleanse that. On the other hand, I may have to listen to analysts and other subject matter experts and listen to that analysis as they go back and forth. And then as a leader, I may have to decide, make a discerning judgment call. And that's a very human aspect to it before I say, all right, I have to decide. I understand everybody's arguments, but now I'm the general officer or the CEO or whatever it is. We're going to go this way. We need to sell off these stocks, or we need to engage with this, make a product change before that action is made. Um, so wisdom is a proficiency. So this is from Scott. How often are your insights verified to be right? Well, how quickly can you go through that loop, and how quickly does data and information change? That would be that this infinity loop can increase in speed or slow down depending on how the outside systems are changing around you. So both French and German defense ministers said Russia wouldn't invade. French defense minister was forced to resign. What do we call that piece where we find out our wisdom wasn't quite right and so we fix it? Well, when we find it's not quite right and we find another, revealed kind of truth, we have a new understanding. And maybe we have an insight that we didn't get all of it. And so we go back to that insight, understanding, knowledge, and then we make a decision. Well, we need to look further, or we need to take that action. We need to discard that, or we need to once again go through a hypothesis developmental cycle. But all of those set another set of action and another infinity loop, and go again until we feel satisfied that we've made the best decision. And uh, let me just say that most of the time humans are executing actions based on the understanding of the information they have in front of them. Very seldom do we have absolutely perfect information, uh, and it might be time that is driving us. So, our understanding and action has to be driven by might be a deadline. So we have to act now based on the knowledge we have right now. And oftentimes we can look back at things and say, that was a bad call. We know more now. Technology has pushed us in another direction, and we know more. And we need to get, maybe more people involved and go through that information loop. Vanessa, it's important to consider objective data. What people do with this data depends on their policies and practices. Oh, so true. And how far they let that knowledge flow. Someone who makes an expensive mistake may be let go by some managers. However, there are other managers that consider that a learning lesson, and that the person in charge is retained and asked to learn from this and not repeat it. We learn more by our mistakes than by our successes. That is true. The DoD is trying to get away from, um, we're trying to say fail forward, to get away from a failure as a reason to be removed. It should be a learning point. NASA has a wonderful book, and I was happy to hear some of the people who developed that from Apfel, Aptel. And the title of the book, it's a book that is, let's see if I can put this about this size. So not a big book, not much bigger than this. And it's called My Best Mistake. And what they did is, some engineering thing is going wrong. Somebody didn't know something and they made a wrong decision. And what they did to say, oh, I alerted this person, I tagged that, I did this, and believe it or not, it came out and it helped the engineers find something different and new. And so even though their decision initially was a wrong decision or based on wrong data, how they went through to correct that and spread that understanding, fix this, we gotta on and on, became, their best mistake, because a lot of learning came out of it. And um, people had a better understanding, and it wasn't just, easy peasy. And so a lot of those My Best Mistake shows, uh, the learning that came out of the trying to fix something before it became a disaster, and the learning that came out of that. So, very good point on that. The DoD unfortunately looks at mistakes as relieved of command often, and now they're trying to say, all right, what's the lesson learned? In DoD, often we have lessons learned and then we put them on the shelf. There we go, file it here, and we don't take them down the next time we have to make a decision or start a process. And we are trying to get the DoD to take their lessons learned, and not just lessons learned and filed on the shelf, but lessons used and lessons um, circulating, not just learned and done. And so I'm part of that for the Marine Corps Innovation Challenge, looking back at things that didn't work before, how can we improve them and, and innovate? Innovation is different than inventing. Inventing is coming up with something brand new, never been done before. Innovation is taking known things, putting them together in different ways, and comes out of that. And so hence innovation challenge. And so we're trying to look at innovations, um, and looking at this infinity cycle. What can we learn and know out of the data and information that's already filed and stored with the government, and how do we extract new innovations and insights and understanding out of that. uh, Vanessa's so correct. Lessons learned are very important to reincorporate for continuous improvement. It isn't just um, I did not know that, Scott. The lady who convinced Dick Cheney to and as a democracy, we need to get more people involved in democracy, because
Yeah, the
it's
problem is
such a
that the
small part.
bureaucracy always stays the same. That's the problem. No
Well,
matter If we could
Well,
change out the bureaucracy as often as we change out the politicians, we might be better.
we change out the poll. Well,
Because our 40-year bureaucrats who've been making policy never elected process how they get promoted up that chain. And I don't know, maybe I'm a little jaded for being in the government as long as I have been, but it just feels like that's where we prove that poop floats, and it just keeps rising to the top.
well, when I look at how many people actually vote in our country, even for a 4-year cycle presidential election, when you look at the percentage of people who vote, we're lucky to get 30 some, 28, 29, 30, 33% for the last 34% for the last election cycle.
To
Sometimes it's
60%
even
of the
less,
people,
25. What happened to the other 70%? You know?
they realize that their vote doesn't matter, because regardless of who wins, nothing really changes.
And I
Honestly, my
I
lifestyle isn't that much different from when Bush was in office, to when Obama was in office, to when Trump was in office, to today. It's not really changed all that much. Maybe on the margins, but not much.
look, one of the things that I said to our legislators uh, when I was dealing with the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, they said, you know, the government doesn't know how to execute its own business. And I spoke up and I said, well, those in the business of government's business, we should have knowledge management, but we don't even have knowledge management as a career series. So how do you expect to have knowledgeable people in the government? And so there was a lot of question about that. And the last, we had 7 pieces of legislation in this last NDAA cycle that talked about knowledge management. Uh, 2022, more than knowledge management. So I'm Congressman Jim Langford and a few others. You know, I've made some impacts with OPM. OPM has recognized that KM in itself is a discipline and is a competency that needs to be recognized, and its value needs to be progressively let's see, evaluated, you know, 1 very little to 5, you know, uh, very high degree.
Yeah. The agency I'm supporting right now, they're talking about adding it into the performance evaluations. And it's not just as a particular career field, it was for everybody. What are they doing for knowledge management? And it's because the number of retirees that they should be having
It's
in
coming.
real short order.
Your agency, I'm not quite sure what agency you're with, but that is they want to make KM to be part of a competency model that will be added to the GS series and the GG series, that you have to have a high competency model for those knowledge skills. You know, if you are a lower graded person, you might need a competency model of, or it's level of 3, whereas if you're running a program or whatever developed. But at this particular KM announced, we had one of 4 models when I'd asked outcomes. One was a number, and I'd ask for 0345. Another one was several smaller allied careers, sweep them together into a larger career field, like taking records, government information, and librarianship, sweep them all together and put that into a knowledge management number. The third was that based on a competency model, people who did these skills at this level of proficiency could be crowned like a CKO, which would allow feeder from any of the GS series, not just signals or intelligence or etc. So a career field manager could say, you know, that would be a feeder for any career field. And then the last one was a parenthetical addition to like GS 2210 parentheses knowledge management. Because if you remember when I started this journey in 2018, KM used to equal SharePoint, and for a long time, SharePoint equaled KM.
Yeah.
That was the history, and we've been trying to change that, move that. So now
Yep.
KM is considered a definite competency discipline that OPM will now be putting in to their or adding into the DSGG system for that. OPM said they couldn't take knowledge out of any of the GS series because we all use knowledge to do, you know, in an individual job.
Yeah.
So
Are you still at
as a knowledge manager, when an internal customer comes to me for help, if I try to explain, I would get booted out of their office. Don't get wrapped up. Just help your customer solve their problems. And that's where we get right to the action. We get an understanding and we can act and help them. But for the policy side, that's where it sits because we don't want to say, you know, one career field dominates the other. And that's where this loop was. But you're right, Ivan. You know, what your customers want is understanding and action.
Yeah. Are you still at DISA?
I am not. I'm at Headquarters Marine Corps at the
Okay.
Pentagon, not Quantico. So
Yeah.
I'm at working for the Deputy Commandant.
Years ago, I was at
I
DISA, and at that time, we were underneath the Chief of Staff's office. They were streamlining business processes, as every new leader does. And so, you know, because they want that bullet on their evaluation. So KM went back to the CIO's office and everything just kind of fell apart. And I don't know whatever happened to it because I'd moved on. But are you finding actual CKO positions in most of these agencies now? Because KM program.
am finding CKO. I've applied for a few of them. So I'm finding agencies that have to collaborate across the spectrum. One of them has a rather robust KM program, IRS, NASA, State Department is developing. Tara came from State Department or the FSI, Foreign Service Institute. Other ones, the Department of Energy, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Many of them have very robust and even APQC tracked KM maturities, 3s and 4s. IRS is at an APQC KM maturity of 3. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has an APQC tracked knowledge maturity of 4. So some places they're just trying to get KM started. The Marine Corps is very much that way. And they're just trying to get programs, trying to come out of their hierarchies, trying to come out of their silos, trying to connect those things together. I would just say they have just the beginning awareness.
Hey, Cynthia,
But
I have something that kind of, we haven't really talked about, and that's the people skills. That's as a big part of our job as a KM, or it's our concierge service, our ombudsman, our solving problems with the soft skills, the listening skills, which I find is probably the most critical part of a good KMer's job, as opposed to data analytics and SharePoint and all that technical side of it. Can you comment about that?
I can. We just at today's symposium, we looked at how we as people understand what our customer needs. They don't care, if you needed to get, 15, 18 different Excel spreadsheets to look up. They just need an answer. They just need help from you. On the other hand, as a KM human, if we understand the tools that can get us the information quicker, so we can synthesize it and make knowledge of it and give it to our customer faster. Our customer goes, wonderful, you did a wonderful job. Thank you, that's exactly what I needed. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're looking at tools, not that the tools run the human, but the humans take a look at, I don't care what tool, if you give me an envelope with the right telephone number written on the back of it, that's good G2, that's good knowledge.
Thank you for watching KMCDC's presentation. Hope to see you at the next monthly meeting.